Recording.
Yeah, it's a slide.
And we'll get the slides.
I want to welcome everybody to the June meeting of the Transportation and Street Activity Permit Committee. I'm Betty Kay, the chair of the committee. Jess is not with us today, but Zach Palmer is here, the district manager. And we're soon going to see what the agenda is. Get started.
Yes, sorry. Little trouble.
Yeah, in case, for those who haven't noticed that WebEx has changed everything tonight, we have to re-enter get a new account, which is kind of slowing things up.
Well, it shows the right thing.
Yes, could you go full screen?
Okay.
Great, if you go to the next one, it's the June meeting. Can't move that. The agenda, yeah, we have 3 items tonight. And the first one, we'll start and introduce Alexis here. This is about a piece of legislation. Just because we have someone new here to orient you. The Senate bill and the Assembly bill, you can tell by the S or the A that starts from. Have to be companion bills. They both have to pass in order for them to go to the governor to be signed. Which is why we're talking about 2 identical bills. So it looks like 2 bills. It is, but it's for 2 different houses. So it's actually the same thing. Which is why Alexis is going to be talking about this piece of legislation, which is about the known as the super speeder legislation. Alexis, if you'd like to introduce yourself. She's online.
And we still can hear it.
Yeah, no, are you muted, Alexis?
She unmuted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm not used to WebEx. Thank you so much for having me today. My name's Alexis Fikas. I am the New York organizer with Families for Safe Streets. We're an organization that's made up of people who have been affected by traffic violence. All of our members have lost a loved one, been injured themselves, or take care of someone who was injured in traffic violence. And we're working to make sure that doesn't happen to anybody else.
Okay, Alexis, just let us know when you want to switch the slide.
Oops.
Um,
Sorry. It's having a little trouble. Okay. I think
No,
I
that's
got it.
Awesome. And again, thank you so much for having me. These 2 bill, this bill that we're working on, Senate Bill S 4045, is to really deal with the problem of New York's most reckless drivers. We have been we can keep track of some of the super speeders, some of the worst drivers in the city based on their camera violations. And there are some people across New York State who are getting a ticket on average every 16 hours. And that's only in like school zones. So we are advocating for a piece of technology that's known as an intelligent speed assistance device, an ISA, which would be installed in the vehicles of cars that are consistently found to be speeding and breaking the rules. And this technology means that the car cannot physically go over the speed limit. It uses over 5 miles over the speed limit. It uses GPS to identify what the speed limit is at different locations. This is really similar to successful legislation that was passed many years ago by Mothers Against Drunk Driving for breathalyzer interlock devices, where if you get caught and you get enough DUIs, you have a device put on your car so that you have to drive safely or drive legally. Next slide. Cool. So like I said, this is a device that can be installed on vehicles. Although a lot of newer cars are actually including these standard, but they are traditionally an aftermarket device that can be installed just like the breathalyzer interlocks. It is dynamically connected to the speed limit using vehicle cameras, road signs, GPS, virtual maps to know what the speed limit is and make sure that the vehicle doesn't go more than 5 miles per hour over the speed limit. And the technology interfaces with the throttle, not the brakes, so it doesn't make it choppy. It just is kind of like having cruise control on your car. It'll keep you at the speed that you're supposed to be at. And while it seems like it's kind of cool new technology, it's actually been around for the last 3 decades, and the vast majority of the New York City fleet actually has this technology on it. And you will see a lot of private companies also having this on their vehicles, just because it prevents people from speeding, and it really reduces something called a hard braking event, which is just shorthand for basically a crash. Next slide. So the reason that we're so focused on the speed limit, and you may remember that we've worked on lowering the speed limit in the past, is because of how stark this graph is. Speeding really is deadly, and just a couple miles per hour faster can be a really big difference between being lightly injured, being severely injured, or not making it home that day. So it is really important that the speed limits that we have are adhered to, because that really does change outcomes when there are crashes. Next slide. And so I think like we get a lot of questions about why we aren't just taking away these drivers' licenses, impounding their cars. And unfortunately, taking away licenses is not effective. 75% of people continue to drive once their license is removed. And this group of people who are these super speeders are way more dangerous than your average driver. They're 5 times more deadly. They cause a disproportionate amount of carnage on our streets. And because we know who they are and we know what cars they're using, we can put this into their vehicles. And there's a whole system that is already that already exists across the state to put the breathalyzers in, so we could do the exact same thing with this ISA tech. Next slide. So this is just a couple of clips about recent crashes that have been caused by super speeders. There are drivers going around with 160 traffic violations. There was a young woman killed last year in Astoria who was hit by a vehicle with over 90 citations within 2 years. These people are the average American, the average New Yorker gets 1 speeding ticket and they don't get another one for like at least 5 years. But these people, again, are just racking up tickets, and sometimes they're paying them off, but sometimes they're just racking up these tickets and these huge fines and continuing to drive and put lives in danger. Next slide. Yeah, so like I said, this is a device that would be put onto these vehicles by like the same kind of place that would put the breathalyzer on, and it prevents the car from going over 5 miles over the speed limit. And so the bill currently would apply to any vehicle that receives 6 or more speed or red light camera tickets within a year, and any driver who receives 11 or more points in their license over 2 years. It's 2 different paths to get this device, because in most of the state there aren't speed or red light cameras, and we want to make sure that this is also getting the drivers that are really being reckless outside of the city and outside of these major transportation hubs. If you get 11 points, getting 11 points is driving 2 to 3 times the speed limit in New York City. It would be going 60 in a 20-mile-per-hour zone. So 11.6 speed tickets. These are really chronic, problematic drivers. Next slide. Forgot I had this one in there. So this kind of talks about how these violations are defined, the speed camera violations, and I've never gotten any points on my license, so I was quite shocked when I saw how the point system works. But this is not people that are just speeding once or twice by a little bit. These are people who are either chronically speeding a little bit over the limit or really like speeding egregiously over the limit on our streets. Next slide. Right, and so I do just, along with telling you about this bill, which I'm happy to answer any questions you all might have about it, I do just want to make sure that you know that Families for Safe Streets does have support services available for people who have been affected by traffic violence. I work on this kind of legislation. I work really closely with a social worker who does some great work. We connect people with peers who have experienced similar crashes, and it's it's not a club that we want to have to welcome anyone into, but we do have a lot of resources and things to help if you or anybody else in the community board has been affected by traffic violence. And I think there might be 2 more slides, but I think that's it.
Okay, then I have a couple of questions just to clarify for myself. One, to get a speeding ticket in New York, don't you have to be going more than 10 miles per hour over the speed limit?
Yes, you have to be going 11 miles over the speed limit.
Okay, so whether it's a policeman or a speed camera, you have to be going at least 11 miles per hour over the posted speed limit.
Definitely for the speed cameras. I actually am not 100% sure about police pulling people over.
The other thing is with speed cameras, you don't get points for those speeding tickets, correct?
You do not.
Okay, so that's why 2 tracks makes more sense too. Because if you have camera tickets, which is probably the most common in New York City because of the placement around the various schools, those don't count as points against yours.
Yeah, so the reason that those don't count as points against your license because the points are put onto an individual and these violations are given to a specific car. But that's why this legislation is also focusing on the car that is speeding and would make changes to the vehicle.
Right, are there any questions? Yeah, Cody.
I have just one point that I think is that you may have made, but I didn't hear it. It's just that, when we talk about speeding automobiles, it's also dangerous for the car driver and in addition to pedestrians. And we know that slower speeds or going at a lower rate speed, when a car crash is safer for the driver as well. And
Yeah.
I do have
Good.
quick question about when you say people who rack up this many violations and they're ordered to get the actual device fitted in the car, would that be supplied by the court or would that be something that you go out and buy, or where would that come from?
Yeah, so it is a court order to put it on, but the cost is borne by the driver of the vehicle. There is a small there's a fund collected from the majority of the funds of like getting this installed for people who might not be able to afford to get this device installed, but they're not particularly expensive. There are different different kinds that you can get, and they can range from like $300 to $1,000. I mean, some of these people are racking up hundreds of thousands of dollars in speeding tickets and fines. but it is something that the driver themselves pays for, just like the ignition interlock devices.
I have a question about,
Mitch, hold on next, and then
Sorry.
Santiago.
What's his name?
Alexis.
Alexis, I mean, in principle, of course, it's a worthwhile cause, and I can't imagine what some of these families are going through. I just had one question, because the focus is on the speeding and the safety. Not that I'm for cars blocking bus lanes, but a car I saw you have bus lanes included. So a car that's not doing, in the wrong lane, but, going 5 or 10 miles an hour because they forgot where to turn, there's no, that's a separate issue. So I'm just curious why that's included in this, when the justification for this is totally like for safety and something I support 1,000%. I just was wondering why that's included also.
It does not include bus lane
So maybe
violations.
there's something wrong, because I saw if you go back one of the slides, it said school buses, that's definitely, if a school bus has a sign out and somebody even goes by 5 miles an hour, I want that to be counted as points, because, that's super dangerous. But I did see the word bus lane after something. No, not that far back. Go forward more. Yes, you see that? Red light, no, right there. School bus, and then the last word says bus lane. Nice.
Okay. No, you're right. That is, I was thinking you were talking about parking violations, not a moving violation. Honestly, all of the moving violations are really dangerous. So I think, again, most people get one of these tickets and they don't get them again. So
I agree with you. But
this is like the most egregious drivers.
I just, like I said, in principle, I agree with everything, but just that one bus lane thing has nothing to do with the gist of what you guys are doing. And I think if there's anybody that's on the fence, and I'm for this, but if there's anybody else on the fence, I think that could be something, especially a company car where they have multiple people doing it, and some knucklehead is, in the bus lane too much. I think that could be something that could be used for somebody to vote against it. So that's the only thing that I would say to separate, but like I said, in principle, I'm for everything else.
Yeah, that's a really great note. No one else, I haven't actually heard that one. We are keeping track of all of the concerns that people have. So I will definitely mention this when we have our next conversation with Bill
The
sponsors.
safety focus. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And Santiago.
Yes, hi Alexis. Just a quick question. Are there trackers on these devices? Or can they be remotely disengaged, for example, if there's an emergency situation?
There is an emergency override that I believe it is either 5 or 10 seconds that you can override it. It is connected to GPS because that's where it's collecting data from. I am not totally sure about how much data it's tracking.
Okay. I was just wondering if if there's a emergency event in New York City and these people want to override it to avoid any kind of, self-harm, then that might be something that would cause concern for them.
Mm-hmm.
So just throwing that out there.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, there is an override, but I'll make a note of that. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with Mitch, that the bus lane violation, that is not a safety violation, especially with the proliferation of how they're putting bus lanes everywhere. Sometimes you might just have to go around an obstruction, but then the bus comes, they'll issue you a summons for it. That definitely should not be part of it. But the real problem is the NYPD, they're not doing their job. I don't want to have to rely, this technology is being installed because the NYPD isn't doing their job. I just don't want to create more bureaucracy for this, but yeah, definitely about the, also, how long is the duration of this electronic monitoring?
Right, the device installed for a year, and there you have to like go to a mechanic like once a month to confirm that you haven't like removed it. I Oh, so yes, I think like there is definitely a big problem with enforcement, that like with physical, like in-person enforcement, that I don't have a solution for. You know, we work with the NYPD, we go to their CompStat meetings, we you know, try to do what we can to work with them. But right now this is like not a lot of people are getting pulled over, especially within New York City. And these people are racking up so many violations that they really are putting lives at risk. So, and I think that one of the reasons that our organization does like this bill is because, you know, it ideally will prevent interaction with people and cops. It should free up the police to deal with things that are, you know, more dangerous than the speeding. You know, I don't know what they will actually do, but it is because they're like this information is being collected and we know who these bad actors are. We really like the fact that this would just kind of take the police out of the equation.
Oh, how do you address lowering the speed limit? We'll just say in Manhattan to 20. How do you address e-bikes going above the speed limit? Sometimes they might even go 10 above the speed limit, especially in the school zone. How do you address that safety?
Yeah, every single e-bike that you can get on the market already has this kind of device in it. So like when I get onto an electric city bike, it taps out at, I'm not sure exactly what, but unless people like all of the electric bikes are required to already have this kind of technology on them. So I think
I've seen quite a few go above that, especially in the school zone. If the school zone, it's going to be 10, 15, wait, is it 15? I've seen them
Are they
go
city
faster.
bikes or these like deliveristas? 'Cause
Deliveristas, right,
yeah,
right, not city bikes.
They can
Right.
get basically like things that are not
They're
like,
class twos.
yeah, like it's essentially illegal, like some of the bikes that they do.
Right. Any plans on how to prevent speeding on e-bikes? Not the city bikes, because they're controlled with the speed.
yeah, I mean, I think what we really need to do is you know, you mentioned the deliveristas, and I think that unfortunately there are just a lot of incentives on them to not not cycle safely because they have a lot of pressure from the apps that they're delivering for to get to, you know, 3 different neighborhoods in 5 minutes to deliver food. So, you know, I think that there is a lot of, you know, we work with the Los Deliveristas Union, and we are working to, you know, rein in some of the bad actions, the bad actors on the apps, because, you know, we have deliveristas as our members too. And, you know, they get penalized sometimes for like stopping at a stoplight by the apps. So, you know, I think that there are a lot of different solutions. I think that you know, I think it is good that we already have speed limiters on most of these electric bikes. And I think that we could probably do a better job of making sure that they are on all of the bikes and that they're not getting tampered with, just like I wouldn't want any of the cars with this device on it to be tampered with either. But I think it's going to be, it needs to be a layered approach, and we need to really work on getting the app companies to stop penalizing people for being safe.
Thank you.
Brendan, Cody,
A comment and then a question. So to push back on the bus lane safety, I have a very specific example. So on Broadway at Barclay, there is that bus lane the Woolworth building also houses a special needs school. And so those kids are like getting out right there. And that's a school bus, but also like that's a super safety issue. And in the afternoon when they're coming out, that lane is not necessarily used for them to get on the bus, but many of them are like crossing the street there and stuff. So I think it is like a safety issue that the bus lane tickets like would help to resolve. So I'm indifferent to having the bus lane language in there or not, but just wanted to call that out. And then question for you, Alexis, that you probably have gotten often, which is and this is maybe why you have like kind of a two-pronged approach. If the car is the one that's been ticketed and has the device in it, I can essentially, as the bad actor, just get like either get a new car or drive a different car and still be a student.
Yeah. It is not going to be perfect. It's not going to get every single bad actor off of our streets. But it is a good way to start. And it is, it will like slow down a good number of these drivers. You know, I think right now we see that people who can just afford to buy another car are just affording to pay a bunch of tickets. So I can't fix wealth inequality with this bill, but I think that those are kind of few and far between, and those bad actors, I don't think will ruin the whole program. That is.
I get that. I mean, I don't think it's just like financial inequality, but like if you go outside the city and it's a two-car household, I have a device in my car, so I'm going to use my partner's car, sort of thing. So I think that's just something again to like take into consideration. But I think in general, I'm all for like any kind of approach to make our streets safer.
Well, if you keep speeding with the same behavior, then your spouse.
That's true.
Same problem there too.
Yeah.
At least there's a little bit of pressure on you to maybe not do it at all. Cody.
Just ready to say, I really want to see this passed. I was just curious, have you all taken the temperature in Albany as far as, what you're hearing, what the discussion is, and your selling technique, and also, concerns. I think this should be hyper-focused on speeding. And it's like, whatever it takes to get it through, I would hope that, that'll happen.
Yeah, so that's a really great question. We are feeling pretty good about this bill, although the budget coming so late really shortened the legislative session and has just made things a little difficult. I will actually be up in Albany tomorrow, speaking with legislators. We're feeling really good about getting this passed in the Senate this year, and we are really hoping that we can also bring the Assembly on board. But we are, we've been collecting, a bunch of sponsors, we get like 2 or 3 new sponsors every week at least. There aren't like a ton of concerns about this legislation that we have heard, some of the things that you all have mentioned, but most people recognize that it's pretty common sense to make sure that the worst drivers aren't putting the rest of us in danger.
Okay, any other questions for Alexis? Okay, well, because I had sent you a document that in fact I got from Alexis, talking about a lot of the bullet points, but also highlighting some of the stats. They're pretty horrifying.
Yeah.
And I somewhat, actually, you want to have the next slide? Sorry, Zach. Within the liberty, like I always do, to draft a resolution because I have to have something ready to get done quickly. Just so you know, Santiago, these things are up there because we always start with, we'll suggest some wording. So to save that whole bit, I'll suggest some wording and it's something that people can respond to and try to mold and do what they want before we vote. Okay, so I don't think it's fixed and this is exactly what we're voting. Unless that's what the committee decides, Mitch.
So I support that wording. The only thing, I just wanted to add something and then politely respond to Brendan. It was that specific location, I couldn't agree with you more. I don't think that's the norm. And what I think though, to back up your point, I feel that the bus lane thing that's in there covers that location and the red light thing also, because if children are crossing the street, they have to cross both lanes. And I really want to focus on the speeding aspect of it. So I would just propose everything you said, yes, but I would, if the majority feels the same way, like taking out the bus lane thing as something that's not the focus of the speeding thing. Of course, if somebody's speeding in the bus lane, of course, but I would think the bus lane the bus lane with the bus stops and the sign, guys going 1 mile an hour around that thing, I want him ticketed. But, so I think that takes care of that, but
But
that's,
to me, clarify that with Alexis. Alexis, is that actually in the bill? Because the bill's already written.
okay.
I'm pulling up the language now because I am not 100% sure.
It may not be in there.
Yeah.
Then that's fine, yeah.
Yeah, and it's not in the resolution, so. or
There is
in-
nothing about bus lanes in there. So
I'm
I think
sorry,
it,
Alexis,
It's
There's
not.
nothing, it's,
was that a typo with the bus lane?
no, she was just giving examples
Okay, fine.
as like
Yeah.
part of her presentation.
Then, as Gildy Rather says, never mind.
Clarify the point for us.
Yeah.
Did you have a question as well?
No, I would just wanted to say that I would propose to, if the bus lane was in there, then to maybe accept for that one thing, but, it's already taken care of.
Great. Anything else anyone has to say? Language, or would you like to move to vote?
Move.
Taking your place. Brendan. That's usually Brendan's.
Yeah, and I'm purposing me, call the question,
Sure. Yes,
second, are you seconding?
yes, sir.
It would be the second.
Oh, yeah, second.
With that, would you like to take a vote?
Yeah.
Here's Joe recording.
Okay.
So are there any no's? One. Because I don't see anyone on. Are there any abstentions? Zero. Any recusals? Zero, there shouldn't be. None, yes, should be yes.
All in favor? Yes. Awesome.
Thank you.
Passes.
Thank you, Alexis.
thank you so much for your support and for the resolution. I'd love to get the language when it's finalized. If you could send that to me. And if you have any time to call your state senators, we think we're going to get something done in the state senate in the next few days. So we would love a little bit of help if you have time to make any of the reach out to any of them.
Well, then what I want to know from Zach is, can we release a draft, knowing that it's just marked as a draft? The whole board isn't until the end of the month.
Gotcha.
We'd have to go to the 25th.
Okay.
I know we voted on it, but I'm reading the legislation. It says any 6 notices of liability, so it could be anything. It could be bus lane violations, not moving violations. I mean, a school bus, just somebody occupying a bus lane when the MTA bus comes and they have cameras on it and they'll take a picture and issue a summons. So that counts as well. Just want to let you know, it does include notices of liability. It doesn't specify.
If
So
you're parked there.
so it's a very broad category.
If you park there, you get a ticket, but that shouldn't count against this, for the speeding thing, because that has nothing, so I would just, some caveat in the language, I would support it, with the exception of that one caveat, or if that can be changed, or is already done via Alexis.
I will bring it up with the bill sponsors. I think it is. I think really like the differences between if it's a moving violation versus like a parking violation. But I'm going to bring this back to the bill sponsors and let them know how you guys feel
Because
about it.
there's some, just on Broadway over here, where you have like the trucks that have sometimes like a double parked, and you make a turn and you have to be in the bus lane, and depending on like for a second, I mean, I don't
Oh,
have.
no, if you're
But it
turning,
happens.
you don't get a ticket.
I'm sorry?
If you're turning, you don't get a ticket in the bus lane.
Right, what I'm saying, sometimes, if you're turning, let's say you're going, you're on Wayne Street and you make a right on Broadway, sometimes it takes you a block to get to the other lane because of double parked cars and the placards, and bus driver has a bad day. I mean, these things, I know, it's not just, I see them, you see those situations happen. I would just like to focus on the speeding thing, and, so that's why I bring it up, Alexis.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's helpful to know. And I will
Thank
share.
you. Okay.
Yeah, no, let her deal with that, and also for your information, I can forward it to you. The DOT currently has a rule being evaluated for clarifying the bit about bus lanes and bus routes, and it's really pretty straightforward who they go after, and you have to be doing something that's
Agreed.
parking or staying in a long time.
Well, that's common
Other
sense.
things are all allowed. I was amazed how many things are
Yeah.
allowed. It's a long list. A lot of what you suggested are not acceptable anyway.
Wait, with the MTA bus, with the bus
with the
lane?
MTA bus cameras.
So if there's a vehicle in the lane, if you're in a bus lane, they can give you a summons, but that's not a safety violation or a speeding violation.
They can give it to you under certain circumstances, and that was one of the questions that Mitch had that I was answering. But you're right, that's not a speeding issue, which is what Alexis had said she will take up with the bill sponsors.
Okay, that's fair. Because if people
All
are,
I can do.
people are raising these concerns now, there will be more than me too, so, anything with this past.
It sounds like it's more a yes than not, so it sounds like they're in support
I mean, I already supported the bill.
Yeah,
the resolution.
it's already passed, so
Yeah.
that's not an issue. I was more concerned about the timing and if we could do anything with the draft, or otherwise it is the end of the month. Before the full board votes on it and it's finalized.
Yeah, I mean, it passed committee, so it can be shared as past committee.
Well, I said, so as long as you know that, yeah, we've marked it draft, because that's all it can be until the full committee passes it at the end of the. But if that should help to show the tendency, what's being looked at, that helps, like, I'll do that. It should be done within the next day or two anyway, because I have to have it done in the.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, they are all out in Albany right now, which is why I didn't know she didn't be able to come today. So I understand the time sensitive, it's very unusual that it happens. Want to go on to item number 2, keep moving along, and now we can all look at Kate. Most of what you have to say or have said in the past is going to be on slides anyway, because all the comments that came into me, I put on there, and some of them, of course, sound good, some of them are other people's. Can't believe this.
Okay. Are you, I don't know if she thinks she's presenting or you're presenting.
I can just give a brief overview. So,
Great.
recap from, this is a follow-up from last month's presentation, where we went over, microhubs pilot program, which right now we're piloting on the west side, where we're designating sites for trucks, to.
Well, that's in,
Yeah, okay, great. Then if you want to go through the slides, there's a diagram, that shows.
there's all kinds.
Sure, yeah.
How about the repeat of last month's was expansion? But again, especially for you, Santiago, this is the problem that we're trying to deal with. Well, the DOT is trying to do. It's just very unplanned, where it's on the sidewalk, it's on the street, it's all over the place.
And we have a diagram.
Yeah, and there are a number of goals. It's not singular. That's what some of the goals are. Yeah, well, you can read it.
We're looking to reduce the cross-docking that takes place in the middle of the roadway and on the sidewalk. Improve the safety for delivery workers, as well as reduce emission of large trucks coming in and doing deliveries in a small area. If you want to go to the next slide.
Yes, and we've had a number of complaints because of this activity going on unplanned around our district.
So we are looking to have microhubs, a space in the public right of way, where goods are taken from a large truck to it can be a cargo bike, a hand truck, or an electric vehicle, to do a delivery in the neighborhood. And if you want to move.
And I think in most of the ones that currently exist now, and in a very unplanned state, are either usually they're going to delivery carts. Occasionally, they're going to e-bikes, but mostly delivery carts in our district. Next. Next, we're in phase 1 right now.
Yes, we are in phase 1, where right now, we have sites on the west side and in Brooklyn as well, where we're contracting with 8 companies to begin with. So each company will have access to a specific site. And we're looking to expand next year. So we're really looking for feedback from the community boards about where you see need for this. We gave some sample locations that we think are eligible in C1.
Yeah, that we're gonna be talking about one by one, so what about that next? Okay, we got some placement of criteria, but I'll shortcut this. This was decided to not be instructive enough. So the DOT really went a lot further than this, because this is what they did show us last month. Now the rest is where they kind of built on new material. Next.
Rendering what it would look like. Essentially, so 80 to 150 feet in length total. There would be signage designating the route which company is able to use it, the hours of operation, as well as safety barriers, flexible delineators to keep cars or other vehicles from driving into it.
As well as, I mean, the complete mental blank. What are those symbols called on the middle? QRs. They also QR code for people who want to file a complaint that they're not operating the way it should be. Next. Because just even realize, this is what they look like. I want this embedded in your mind. Because I've had all kinds of comments over the last couple of weeks about, well, they're gonna build out this big structure and it's gonna take so much time to make up. This is what it really looks like. It's gonna be much more like the Whole Foods cargo bike area. So it's not a big change. Yeah, if you have anything else to add.
These are pictures from New York.
From the west side, yeah. These are the new ones that were installed this spring.
Next. This is too elaborate. If anyone wants a copy, I'll send you the slide and you can look at it in detail.
I think it's helpful. It's helpful because it shows, you said 80, it said 80 to 150 feet in length. That's a lot of real estate.
Well, as I said, it depends. If they're gonna have a space for large trucks to pull up to unload, they're already there. And then you're going to use minivans. Vans are gonna be doing the running in that particular location. Those are all gonna add up to a lot more space. Is everything gonna be there all the time? No, but when the truck is there, the unloading, going to take it up. And they're taking it up already. They're just taking it up wherever they're parking. So keep that in mind.
Did we get clarity on if like the refrigerated trucks can park in these locations?
So I believe that's still being decided, but I have to follow up with my colleagues on that one.
Yes, and the reason, if you remember when we had Empire Clean Cities come in, they were talking about the ones that are cargo bike that they were using. One could take a lot more weight, which made it more efficient, but they could have refrigerated ones, which is what they were using on their pilot, like at Governor's Island, and would be using here in the Seaport District. So it really depends what kind of cargo bikes they're using, but there are specific ones that would allow refrigeration.
Oh, I was actually thinking like the actual loading truck, because I know that we got tons of complaints at like White Street when they were housing in that parking lot, because they're just so loud and they were there all night, all day and all night. And I think that's probably the only thing that would.
Is there any reason they would be there that long? Because they're really using these hubs, aren't they really just there to get unloaded?
That is the idea that they should be unloading in a timely way. But I will, again, double check.
Yes, because now that was the understanding of what you said. The truck is pulling up, it's unloading to these other devices, they're taking off. Which should solve that problem over another location where that's unplanned. Just unfortunate.
But there's no stipulation that limits, that says you can only unload a refrigerated truck for half an hour. There's nothing to stop them.
Not that I'm aware of it.
I will say it depends how the rules are written. The ones that they're putting in a lot of commercial zones now, say you must be actively unloading or loading. If so, use a QR code and you start to complain that people are storing and stopping there, but not actively. experience.
But this pilot program, it gives the space to a firm, one of these firms. So it's only for this company to use. So we're leasing public space to a company who is for profit. So they're most likely going to optimize it. I mentioned before, they might even consider loading, receiving packages instead of just unloading and sending it out. I could foresee them even starting to collect packages because you already have the truck there. You might as well use it on the return route. So that's my concern, that they're going to use it for more than what we think. I mean, look, it's entrepreneurial, so they will, and that's to their credit. And then if they don't use it, we're giving this public space to a firm that no one else can use, because at least currently, the streets that we have now as it is, other firms can use it. We're basically only gonna let one firm use this.
Well, no, they can't use it because like technically, like these people are just accruing tickets. So that's what's happening, either because they're double parked or like if I'm thinking of like, where Paros is, that they always park at that park. Like they're just collecting tickets. So like they're not using it legally essentially.
Well, I mean, I think that's an extreme example. Like, for example, let's say on Fulton Street, it's a commercial loading and unloading. It's available for anybody to use. I mean, commercial. If you're not commercial plates and you're not loading, unloading, you get a summons. And those traffic agents, they're always there. But with this plan, only one firm will be able to use this real estate.
Yeah, so that's, in the current phase, it's one company will be allowed to use it. Again, this is the first phase of the pilot. I think we're hoping down the line to figure out a system where maybe multiple companies can use it, but understand the concern. I think the benefit we're hoping to see is rather than having these trucks double parked, unloading and blocking traffic or on your sidewalk and unloading, that's the benefit we're hoping to get those people out of the right of way.
One of the locations that you had in your email, it's Fulton and Cliff. That's in front of a supermarket where they need space to unload their food for us to
Can we
consume.
wait?
Okay.
We are gonna get there. We're gonna
Okay.
get all of them.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, it's emphasized last month, their goal is to have multiple vendors paying to use the same micro hub. They need to figure out how much time are they taking? How many deliveries are they making per day? Is the schedule workable and with which companies? Those are things they're trying to figure out from the pilot. So that's kind of where we are. Yeah, next one, guiding questions. Because I'm going to answer a lot of these questions because these are ones that I think it comes back to, you're asking for CV1 input. So we have to come up with some of the answers to them. But some of them we'll get to them time by time, such as what should the hours of operation be, or what shouldn't they be? However you want to look at it. What kinds of vehicles should they be unloaded to that you think are more workable or preferable? Those sorts of things we'll go through too, which are general answers not tied to a specific location. Next, so it's very helpful to get. Glad the freight team did that. Then we got sites to devote, to consider. You go down, we'll keep going. I think there's just a thank you. We'll go to slides that are just one by one. We will get to all of those. Okay,
You know what?
next slide. There's now a slide for each of those sites. Yeah, you can.
No, I thought you wanted to finish first.
No, if you have a general question, by all means.
Yes, I just wanted to make a suggestion, like I said, on paper, I think it's a positive thing to aspire to if things go well. My only suggestion would be, years ago in the previous iteration of the Transportation Committee, it was brought up, the analogy I want to make is when the film companies are filming and taking up spots, and sometimes they might take up spots where there are meters, but across the street, there was no parking for anybody. So we would try to influence them, make that the first preference if possible, taking up spots that nobody can park anyway, all things being equal. I mean, nobody can park anywhere during the day, but I mean, there are people that I work with that have to drive to within the zone at night. because of the type of work that they do, where they live. And there are places where you can, like nights and weekends, where you can not have to pay $100 to park your car for a couple of hours. So all things being equal, to prioritize the places, and I'm for it, where, like, you can't park anyway, so it
Yes,
doesn't
but
make a
if you
difference.
wait a minute, you'll see what the DOT is suggesting, and I think you'll be probably approve of the kinds of places they're saying. Should be-
Well, regardless of what the DOT is suggesting, that's my suggestion, based on many of the people in the Transportation Committee from a few years ago, when we were dealing with the film crews, saying, we welcome you, it's a good thing for the city, but all things being equal, try to prioritize, not losing the spaces. If there is a street adjacent, that you can do the same thing, and it's a win-win.
Let's move on to these, and I think you'll see what the trend is where they
Sure.
have made suggested areas. We're going to see things, that there's a comment in white. It's probably my question of clarification that I gave to Kate to figure out more details about what exactly they're suggesting. If it is in this kind of yellowish color, this is a DOT response to what they're thinking. If there's another color below it, that is somebody from the committee or CB1 somewhere that has made a suggestion. It's a specific concern to them. Okay, so in this case, Kate, if you want to talk about what's south at Dover is.
Sure, I think, the response though is for Leonard and Broadway, which was the next one. But I just wanna, so we sent a list of potential locations that our freight team, identified, as a first pass of locations that would be eligible in CD1. We're not married to these one locations. We thought it might be easier to give you a list rather than say, hey, come to us with where you think they might.
Oh, that's what this is.
Yep,
Okay.
so, I shared a list. The first one was on South Street and Dover Street, which I actually think I told them, I don't love that one because there's BMCR work. But if you're interested, if you have feedback on that one, we can talk about it. But the next one,
And you'll notice that it is existing truck loading area that they're talking about.
Then I would think that.
I said you may be surprised at the kinds of places they're suggesting.
but yeah, I just want to clarify, the bulleted response is about Leonard Street and Broadway, not South and Dover.
That comment.
Yes.
Okay, let's go on to the next one, lead south and Dover for now.
It's South and Dover is in every part, city.
It's on the other side on the east.
So we think, the south side of Leonard, where there's currently truck loading would be a good location. Both sides of the intersection, with Broadway have the opportunity for existing truck loading areas. That could be repurposed.
Katie, can I just say,
Yeah.
is that truck loading 24/7 or truck loading like 8 to 6 or 7 to 7?
That, I'm not sure.
But that's
Yeah.
kind of like what I was saying, because,
Pull up.
where, like at 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody's coming down for a gig or something like that, and there's nothing there, but you can't, because there's no parts are doing their job, so, but the thing would be 24/7 if it's the hub, correct? It wouldn't, or would it match the sign that's already there?
The hub is going to have posted hours, for when they.
So if it's truck loading like 7 to 7, 7 AM to 7 PM, then the hub would be 7 AM to 7 PM too.
No,
That
because
would be when the trucks,
No, I'm asking you.
the actual painted, area would still be there.
so nobody else could use it. That was my concern. No one else can use that spot except that one firm that's
That's
assigned.
correct,
Yeah.
yeah. But say you want them there loading at
No, I
midnight,
don't.
at 7 p.m.
So I'm going back to my original thing where I first, when Betty said that, I thought, oh, that's great. But now if it's not going by, if the truck is only has loading 7 to 7, but then it's not the whole thing, then to try to prioritize where you can't park there anyway, as opposed to there are taking away spots at night,
I see what you're saying. The spots still wouldn't be there for you or someone else to park.
No, what I'm saying, so it's to prioritize the hub in a place where you can't park anyway.
Got it, yes.
21st.
Fair
Thank
point.
thank you.
But in this commercial space, you would be able to park there. Because the loading zone is only during like 7.
Oh, right.
Yes.
You're asking for the commercial parking spot?
The other people can use it outside of the commercial loading hours currently. But with this micro hub, no one will ever be able to use it during this time, ever, because it's only for that firm. Unloading, that's the.
I see your point. So there are two components to it where there's a actual parking spot for the truck to use when they're pulling in. And then there's a painted area where the cross docking is going to take place. So where you're loading onto bikes. I can check if for the actual parking spot that's reserved for the truck, if that is able to be used off hours. I assume the answer is no, but I can at least check.
I'm just going from the pictures, because if it's painted that beige color, that means no one else can ever park there.
First.
Question is, you can leave chaos on the streets, that's better than preserving storage of people's personal property. They're paying nothing.
No, but now you're preventing utilization of this space that won't be used at night.
But to her point,
My point is, you want private storage of people's goods.
It's also serves a purpose for people who live there and also, with all the road fees and driver license fees that are paid, they pay for it. Congestion pricing,
They're also making the borders.
the orders,
Are also ordering the thing.
okay.
Yeah, I agree with you about like the good of this outweighs the bad of that. But I'm saying, so to me, the middle ground is trying, like I said, trying to find streets where you can't park there anyway. So it's a win-win situation if possible. If there's an area where it's not possible, then I understand. But like the same thing that we made up with the film crews, where sometimes you see they'll take up a whole street and across the street, there's no parking anyway, because, why didn't they just do that? So just trying to find like a win-win for that.
Yeah, no, I agree. The question is also going back to the DOT with why did they say no parking over this? They may have a feeling that they don't want any parking over there, so. I don't know what the outcome would be, but I understand the principle.
when we looking at.
Oh, do you want to see the street?
Is it Leonard and Broadway? Which side, east or west?
Sure. I think on the south side of the intersection.
Betty, on your email, there's links, it was very precise.
Right.
It gave you the Google, it gave you the Google, specification.
Yeah, so just, where you see what it is, it's,
So it would be where?
This is,
Broadway and Leonard.
that's the south side.
So on the south side is one?
That's the south side.
Is,
Yeah, Broadway goes south.
Yeah, our freight team thinks that both sides, Broadway would work,
so on Leonard, either side of
Yeah.
Broadway.
either side of Broadway.
wait, is it on, so it's on Leonard, it's not,
Leonard, other side of Broadway.
Yeah.
oh, okay. Got it. There,
Well, it's taking
South
stairs where the
side.
cars.
okay.
Your south side here.
And these are not locations we're installing anytime soon. So that's why we're not coming with like a more detailed analysis or rendering each specific location.
Which would come later, because again, they're not gonna do all of these either, so this is a brief stream,
Yeah, and also, how long is the pilot?
it's 2 years.
I thought it was 3 years, it said 3.
No, it said 2 years, it's one,
I believe it's 2, but, to double check this.
that seems to be a trend. Maybe I'm thinking about mine.
So that's Broadway and Leonard, do we want to look at the next location?
I'll say, yeah. How's that, President? 6th Avenue median, north of Franklin Street. And this is issued here. Well, Zach gets me in trouble. No. Zach knows that I'm in trouble.
That's in New York City, yeah.
The critical thing I can tell you, which I wish you'd seen in the slide, was that it is As you approach Franklin Street, it's an empty space in the middle of the street, the median. As you're in the north end of that block, you get into Barnett Newman Triangle, which of course Alice and the rest of her friends are strongly advocating for. You can see down at the far end, you can see the triangle. It's really, they're certainly developing it, and they certainly would like to extend it down. Who knows how long it would take?
So this one would be in the middle of
You
the,
guys see that median?
Mhm. That's where it would be.
Nothing,
Yeah.
It would be that. But right now, it's just an empty space. CB1 did pass a resolution last fall, correct? Counted as last fall, wasn't that long.
Barnett.
Barnett, in general agreement with liking to improve Barnett Triangle with more plantings and other things. And by all means, if they can extend it down, that'd be a nice thing to have a boulevard that runs the full length.
Oh, so there's an option to extend.
Well, we don't, there's an option, we don't know yet. There's parks and, actually, isn't that space controlled by the DOT, Casey?
So it's a shared, DOT, plaza and Parks Green Street. And we're in contact with Alice and, her group about their interest in expanding the area. We're also taking a look at, see if we can incorporate it, into future proposals that we make the CB1.
Do you have an idea of how many they're hoping to put in CB1
How many
hubs?
hubs? No, that hasn't been decided yet.
Is there a reason they chose down the middle of the street?
I'm actually double checking because I thought it was on, it's not in the median there.
It says,
I understand.
well, it's kind of
I
nice.
thought it was the parking lane.
In the middle, right? Is that what you mean, like in front of, next to, adjacent to the triangle?
I know that it's supposed to be next to existing meters. So this one, regardless, I understand the feedback about it being in proximity to Barnett Newman and CB1's desire to see that space, you know.
Well, would that be an issue for the park?
Yeah,
Why?
Alice has already said she doesn't like that spot.
What's the, like, because of the environmental impact or?
Do you have a picture of,
But I think limiting their ability to potentially expand their turf, so there's already some kind of.
But we're not talking about like the median, we're talking about if it were where that black car is, right?
so if it's curbside, as Kate is saying, she thought that's where she kind of called it.
Which seems,
If it's curbside, I don't have a sense of what her feeling
okay,
would be.
but her idea was that it was gonna be in the median. Yeah, I can see her opposite of that, but okay, okay.
What about if it's a temporary one, that we all know how long it takes to get capital improvements in, which this would have to be a big capital improvement. We're talking about 8 to 10 years minimum to be able for them to do it.
But
I'm asking, what do people think of? We said, well, we'll consider, because again, if any of these are chosen by the DOT, they would come back with a specific plan for the location, which we do not have now. But we are kind of a bridge to the concept of continued development.
to me, I think the question that needs to be answered is it the median or is it the parking lane? If it's the median, I can understand the opposition, and also, even though it could potentially be a capital project or whatever, they have a friends group, and so it can also slightly be funded privately, so it can happen sooner than later.
Not that kind of expense. The Twain Park, gave me friends that run it.
Okay. Okay.
This is way, way bigger space, and they are very, very.
Oh, you think this is bigger than Wayne Park?
No, Twain Park is larger.
No, the extension they want to make at Twain Park is to go back to
Oh,
historical.
right, the old, yeah.
So they're not adding a whole lot of distance, they're adding more than half the block. So this would be physically a big change compared to what Twain Park is looking at for a change. And I know they said if they had to go with the costs being thrown at them for that, they won't do it.
And they're clearly well funded, so.
I guess, but aside from the question about the exact location here, do you see this as an area where there's issues with trucks, creating a backup?
Yeah. Like, traffic wise, rush hour, when you ride, I mean, riding my bike, it's terrifying still.
Oh, really?
I mean, 6,000. I just think in the middle of,
Bike lane's on the far left here.
Correct.
and it switches over, to the right.
So, but is that more about that if you go further down to where the park is and bike riding there? Because I only ask because I kind of presume that it was not too bad because I know I often will cross over like jaywalk essentially because like traffic is spread out.
It's just the time of day, like, 5:30s to like 7, but I just think of in the middle of the street, that particular location would be kind of chaotic.
Oh, yeah, I would.
Right, so you're both talking about curbside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm thinking more curbside.
Me too.
Yeah.
Curbside.
Is there a general, goal to avoid being adjacent to a bike lane?
I think we want to be close to a bike lane,
Preferably.
preferable to be next to a bike lane, especially if, we're having, goods taken by bike. After basically.
Yeah, so on this side, it would make more sense. Right, adjacent to the bike lane than the one we were looking at.
Kind of. My only thing is thin, and Cody knows I'm anti-cyclist, not really, but kind of. Is like I don't want like the big bikes to end up impacting like everyday cyclists.
Yeah,
I agree.
and that's why I was getting at is that gonna just create more friction between?
I thought y'all were saying like because it's a protective thing for the bike lane, so then like if there's trucks there, then like you don't have to worry about getting hit by cars.
Yeah, it can be both.
Yeah, okay.
It's a huge concern. It's like the fact that these bikes carry cargo are gonna be in our, it's gonna suddenly like, clog up our bike lanes.
Yeah, because I'm thinking like a package could fall off the thing.
Oh, and those things are, they're wide, like,
That's the bigger issue, is they take up the whole.
they take up the whole lane. It's like, I just don't wanna see that happen to the bike lane.
Okay, so in this location, you're interested in a curbside one for the Sixth Church. But also that we need to protect the cyclists that would be using that bike lane because of the size of cargo bikes. If they choose to go to that option, if they go to Hertz, that's kind of solves the problem, they're not interested in the bike lane.
Kind of, but then they probably are, I can easily or quickly see them, one, sidewalk, start taking over sidewalk, and then also like they're gonna be crossing back and forth over the bike lane with their carts.
Maybe yes, maybe no. In my neighborhood, they use Hertz, and that's not as big a problem as you think. It sounds horrible, but it isn't really that big a problem.
Yeah, and it's also, of course, dependent on the company too. Like I think like Amazon is a little bit better because we know who they are and we can afford and all that stuff, but yeah. Okay. Yes, still.
The other question with the QR reporting, how does that work? Someone, it's like it dispatches someone to go and address the issue right away, or how is it handled?
So I'll have to double check, but it's most likely that it's, routed to DOT and we have a team of inspectors that go out, for a variety of our programs. And they would be dispatched to observe it, and I'm not sure what the fine or consequences for this is.
You make them nervous, because we already said that like they are backed up. So,
That's the slide.
So just to be clear, there's not a separate micro team of inspectors? It just files in as general buckets?
Not a moment that I'm aware of.
You know. Okay, this is the next one. This is on north side of Worth Street, west of Church Street. And Kate, the DOT comment. Can I stop?
I'm also pulling up the comments on my end so that I have mocked up on.
I would say, or I would call out that I'm pretty sure we know that there's a high potential that construction is about to start there. Right? Because that's where they are essentially they want to change the plaza to like a building.
Katie, this is one of the points, is that the metered parking area next to the protected bike lane could be also considered. So that would be to my point that it shouldn't be considered. Even though I agree with the whole principle, but, I would just, that would be, I mean, there's so few places where, when, like I said, just, not just thinking of myself, because I don't have a car, but there are people that I work with that once in a blue moon you have to do something, and there has to be a place for some people sometime to be able to just put in a meter for half an hour, and that's one of the few places like in that area. So I would,
Y'all love your cars, I'll tell you what.
I don't have.
He doesn't have-
I'm talking about the both of y'all, because y'all always like advocating for cars.
Myself, like,
Yeah.
if I'm thinking of myself, I don't want any cars around my block. But I live in the world, and there are people that I work with, mostly, people of color, that are working class people that work odd hours, all hours of the day and night, that sometimes have to, from where they live, because they can't afford to live in this neighborhood, that have to drive once in a blue moon, and have to have, so if there's another spot across the street where there's no parking, then fine, but it has nothing to do with loving cars, Brendan. I love bicycles also. But it's, trying not to just think of what benefits you personally.
And I want transportation options.
Yes.
Brendan, especially free parking.
Which is, no. So free bicycle parking is okay, right? Oh, no.
They have proposed at AT&T to take that plaza that's currently closed off to the public, it used to be open to the public. They proposed building there.
I don't know a freaking car. Not that there's anything, I wish I could afford it.
Of course, that also could take time to get approved and built and all that stuff, but just not enough.
Well, we know it, everything else. I've yet to see anything. For quite a while.
That kid across the street is placard parking, so maybe they could put the hump there.
Ooh. Yeah.
I mean, that's my whole, like I said, where cars can't even like at 3 o'clock in the morning, that they can't like pull over for somebody coming home from work, but maybe across the street, there's placard parking, or something like that. I just try to prioritize, a win-win situation.
I'll support that one.
Yeah.
Although we can have placards everywhere.
Yeah.
Probably a silly question, but like could DOT consciously go and look for places where there's pocket parking and say, we're taking this forward.
I don't think it's like in the explicit mission of this, if folks have like suggestions of areas where they think they could use a good micro hub.
Park Road.
I mean, you joke, but I think that's like legit. Like,
Right, nobody's using it.
That's my point. When something doesn't hurt somebody else, why not? Then it's good for everybody.
Yes.
It's not like I'm pro car, it's just that to try to be pro, like compassionate for all needs.
Okay, so Earth and Church, the biggest thing is just reminding the DOT there could be construction along the route. Because they have lots of different options for places.
And this is a two-way street.
where it is, yes.
It seems like all of the others have been one-ways. At least the ones we've looked at so far, I just think two-way
That's a good point.
starts to get a little bit chaotic.
Is that on Church or on the Leonard side, Katie?
It's supposed to be on the north.
Somewhere.
What's the 2 ways, 1 lane each way?
Yeah, it's that way.
As long as there's parking, there's space for what they're looking for. So don't focus so much on the moving lanes and the interference.
Because the meters are on
They don't want-
Church.
They don't want to interfere with those either.
Katie, the meters are on Church, they're not on Worth, so that's why I said what I said, but, because I saw that comment, that the meters could be considered, but the meters are on Church.
This side makes more sense to be in church here. I feel.
Okay. Well, they can look at that when they're developing ideas.
I think we're ready for the next.
Say, next.
Oh, yeah, it says on church could also be considered, that's why I said what I said.
Yeah.
Because,
Paper and Pearl.
So then Friday.
Do you want to see a map?
Yes.
Yes.
Sure. Sorry.
So, yeah, I think on the far side, in front of that, brown buildings, there's, commercial metered parking. I think it's 8 AM to 6 PM.
Can you stand back around? What's in that triangle?
It's just like the entrance of.
Well, that's what I was gonna call it. So that's Delmonico's, I mean. Not that like that is an issue, but like I don't want, like it's a well-known, almost historic location and I don't want to take away from that. That'd be honestly be my only opposition, otherwise it seems like a good location. Not that I want to make the calls.
Although I actually did get an email today about a truck parking on the sidewalk over here. Not to say that that will be cleared.
And also, I guess, I don't know, I don't know if we established that it would be limited hours, so 7 AM, 7 PM. Because I mean, this is more of a dinner place, sometimes lunch, but so.
Yeah, we're going to set hours, on the micro hubs. Based on, I think, the feedback, if you have idea, you don't want to see voting. There,
And we're gonna get to that.
Okay.
we're interested in that.
Okay. I'm done for
I thought you said the micro would be 24/7, but you're thinking of putting hours on it that could match with right now, the no parking, for example, 7 to 7.
Well, the micro hub would be
Interact.
24 hours.
Oh,
So meaning like the location is 24 hours, but like the activeness is from 7 to 7, for example. But like
so
that
then,
gray area is gonna be there forever, but you just can't.
So nobody else can use it except that firm.
and if you were able to do the micro hub and to match the 7 to 7, to me, I don't think there would be any disagreement with anybody because, well, most people, I mean, because I think that's a win-win. You know, it's like, say, somebody's coming back from work or whatever, people that work at night, at 2 o'clock in the morning and they just have to, need a few hours of sleep and you see the whole space open but you can't park there for a couple of hours. It's very frustrating and it doesn't hurt anybody. So that's a suggestion.
So it sounds like this one is potential. If we can agree on that.
Yeah, again, we have to get a more firm suggestion, which is gonna be true on any of these. The question is it worth investigating these further or not? Because this sounds like it doesn't have any real obvious reasons why, and Kate's taking notes, so even if I say that, she's taking notes.
I think that it's just kind of close to this. Part. I don't know if that's a public house. Essentially, just a little bit further down Pearl.
Because replacing a car or a truck really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. And that's really what we found with the Whole Foods. There were all kinds of, you should have been around for that. All these children were gonna die and they were, I mean, it was just one outrageous meeting after another, it was so outraged. And look at it now.
Okay.
Now, Eric.
Thank you. I've been waiting.
Again, I was interested to see, do you really mean just in front of
Kiefer.
Seafood Sultan Market?
Yeah, and again, these suggestions are primarily from our freight unit, where they're looking at it kind of like from 10,000 feet up. So that's why we want feedback. If you're like, this does not work because the Key Food is there and they have their own trucks, that's the kind of feedback we want.
Well, but that's also, I want to know, the way they wrote it, north on Fulton Street, north of the. But do they mean along the driveway, which is really Cliff Street?
That I'm not sure.
Because if it is, that's also a pedestrian walking route
Yes.
from Southbridge Towers to Key Foods and those other things on.
Ben, you said the yellow is your comments or somebody else's comment?
The other, with the big comments I got from the DOT for clarification.
Thank you.
No, the white ones are mine, and they're generally questions asking for
So
clarification.
good, so my thing before was on the yellow comment.
Zach, you need to discuss that picture with the little segment cleanup going. The one that is here. See, eyes like drag the guy.
Yes, and I also want to point out that it came up in the last couple of weeks that there has been a request. Next month, we're going to be dealing with requests of the DOT, a lot of different road safety issues. One of them happens to be at this particular intersection, a request
It's messy.
for pedestrian safety. So that would be contingent to this one anyway. They meet those requirements, which again, we don't have the group till next month. So it'd be a separate resolution anyway, for those details.
Okay, could you actually zoom in on this one, or I'm just trying to see if those are Amazon folks, or if it's like.
Yeah, that's transferring the delivery, e-bike, or when they pull that box, they drag the
Right.
box.
Yeah, and
Yes.
ideally, we want that unloading, see where they have the barriers, we want things like that to be happening in a micro hub.
Yes, so keep in mind, they're really replacing things that are already there anyway, we're just organizing.
Which they shouldn't be doing. I mean, they just, they're breaking the rules and asking for permission later. When they're out there, they take over that area for the whole day.
Well, this could give them real civic.
So this will give them the right.
The, only trepidation I have there, somewhat to your point, is then there's that park that's right next to, Key Foods and everything like that, and we wanted that to be for the public, and while employees are part of the public, I just don't want it to be like taken over by employees of that hub.
Zach, can you go back to, if you can rotate it? Yeah, like right there. The trucks, there are already trucks double parked because Key Food gets deliveries. So this is not suitable. Thank you for taking
Can they
that from me.
take deliveries in here?
They get multiple deliveries at a time.
I think they pull into this area when they deliver for you.
They get multiple at a time. I've seen a semi back into there. Yes.
Yeah.
But they get from different vendors.
But
So-
maybe they need to look at talking to the vendors at Key Foods.
If you're gonna make this spot assigned for e-bikes or whatever carts, you're taking away the capacity of other users, especially Key Food, which is right there.
Well, could they go if you keep spinning, going in the opposite direction of that? Could they go down this street? Not that way. Sorry, there's a cliff. It might be cliff, yeah. Could they maybe be there?
It's really narrow, and I think the NYPD just opened new commands there, so they're doing their own thing.
They did that initially, like a year and a half ago, where Amazon had the box truck there, they were doing
I've
their,
never seen them do
yes.
that.
yes, and then got complaints.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no width here and ED parks on the sidewalk.
Yeah, they, yes.
But further down Fulton,
East on Fulton.
yeah, on the left side of the image now. Like all this area. It's not directly in front of Key Foods.
Tremendous need for something here.
That's
Yeah.
St. That's St. Margaret's, a lot of retirees use it, accessorize.
Oh, it's like a pickup spot.
Yes.
I think the goal here is to be able to service, the deliveries for Southbridge Towers and the adjacent buildings. It's likely a hot spot.
Could they just work outside or inside of a building, I don't know, potentially at 320 Pearl. And then just leverage that. I'm half joking, but also.
Wait, is that the homeless shelter? They went
Yes,
out.
that's what I'm saying. We all hate the homeless shelter.
Excellent.
Let's put employees there.
Fortunately, DOT, we don't own buildings, so we can only.
But you can,
do it
no,
the
you can
right
lease
way.
it, or something, I don't know. Okay.
That's where it gets tricky, because we're mostly only doing these on city-owned property.
Oh, well. I hate to have them not develop any ideas, because I think there are some that are possible. But I think it's gonna be impossible to say yes to anything without a lot of very finite ideas. Obviously, there are a lot of deliveries in that area by a lot of different sources. How about we just say that, you know, that they develop an area more definitely in this for us to approve, because there are a lot of conditions that are troublesome, because there are.
Yep.
Next month, we're gonna be hearing about, pedestrian safety at the intersection, and a bit more from that perspective as well. And it would be tied together as well, which would be potentially helpful.
Maybe just put in that they should run it by Southbridge, because that's, like, don't know the building, they know how, what their commercial needs are. Don't have, you know, there's no one here that has something to say about it.
Well, Eric, don't call him no.
Oh, yeah.
I've been called worse. I used to be, not anymore.
It was new and NOOMP.
What about where we're
You said
looking
no.
right now? Like, so, because there's that sidewalk.
I got it,
you know,
combined it.
hate taking over, no, the other side.
Thanks, Mitch.
Hate taking over sidewalk, there's a really wide space there. I think that might be a loading. Is that a loading? Where, like, next to the Dwayne Reed? Like how,
Meters.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
maybe right there.
There's a hydrant here. But
Might be too close to the intersection.
I think you might have trouble with the hydrant.
If the hydrant is there, the truck can be ahead of it, and then the offloading part, and the bikes could be where the pump, the hydrant is.
I don't think you're gonna do it in the hydrant.
No, yeah, they wouldn't put a pump.
I'll bring it back as a suggestion, but.
I'd still argue that that general area obviously is very needy for something,
Mhm.
but it needs a lot more analysis with specifics. They come to us, as well as the Southbridge Towers, they're gonna need more specifics to really respond to. Because there might be a place they can work out.
But
They
it's
don't-
probably about the same width as Cliff.
Well, those trucks are taking up space, like it or don't want it.
Yeah.
Question is, do you want it organized or not organized?
I mean, yeah, I'm supportive. I have recommendations and locations,
This is one man, but they need to give us
Not
more
here.
finite information by
but
exploring.
not in this area. I'm estimating.
Next one. Warren at West Broadway.
Can we see that?
Count?
Yeah, I think along the parking protected bike lane was the location that they were considering here. And some truck loading areas, on Warren Street.
Want me to pull it up?
Yeah, Ben wants to see it.
Yes, please.
That's generally. Environment.
Oh. One, we know for sure construction is happening right there, where the
Okay.
red brick building is.
Okay.
Where were y'all thinking of putting it?
Northwest, so that's here, no, this is south.
So potentially the parking lane on West Broadway that's adjacent to the bike lane. So like where the painted area is already, I think,
No, it's on this side, yeah.
On this side?
on West, yeah.
Was it, see, they have some empty space that's painted off already. There's not really designated.
So that space is not, there's no metered parking there anyway, correct?
I think there's you can see a meter in the photo.
Okay, well, then,
There's really nothing for most of that length.
I mean, the pavement, it doesn't look like it's metered there.
But if they're on our meters, then I would go back to my original
Look
point.
past that first.
Right, it would likely extend past the painted footprint that's already there, so it would see where that.
It would be the whole block.
There's so few spots for people to have to come down to buy, for any reason, once in a blue moon.
But that's why they double park. You want double parking?
No, no, What, I didn't say they shouldn't be, Betty, I'm saying that, like, if these are suggestions. So then maybe mid-block on Warren Street, where they have just a dedicated space for truck loading and unloading would be maybe first choice as opposed to that.
So
I mean,
this,
people need to, you never have people that have to work anywhere or visit you or at night or weekends, unless you can match it, Katie, you said it's not, you could match it with the hours of the delivery, like 7 to 7.
Potentially.
Right, so then I would be quiet for everything like that.
so this makes me nervous just because like this is a pretty congested block in general, especially with all the sidewalk seating that we've improved. There's the bike lane right there, there's the breaks on the sidewalk. And we know that they're gonna go straight from right there. So then that sidewalk that's already congested, whether it's with the bikes or the carts. And again, we know for sure that building's about to be taken down. So then now all that side is gonna be taken up with construction folks. So,
What is that area? It's painted. What were they planning there? Is that, yeah. It looks like they already, I know they didn't, but it looks like they already constructed the micro home. That's a lot of real,
It's not an empty space, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's daylight.
it's a lot of daylight.
give us some space, give us pedestrians. I know you're in the car all day.
I'm a pedestrian as well.
Give us some space.
Regretfully. Ways you can get space for your car.
Yes, some of them do have bike racks.
Okay.
But I think that, I'm not sure on which side of Warren, but there is commercial parking already. Is there any interest maybe on the side street? If West Broadway is too congested or busy, or,
I might eat my words on this, but I wonder if where that empty lot is, if that part of the block makes sense, because that's been empty for, I'm hearing, almost a decade now. Not even be in that area, but like, just because like that block.
I would agree, but I would think a private developer probably owns that and they're sitting on that to make a killing. That's just guessing that, that was a garage before, right? Oh, like, that was a parking thing, I think there used to be a parking garage on that corner, if I'm not mistaken, so I would assume that whoever owns that is sitting on that to make a killing.
Oh, no, I think that one has like legal issues or something like that.
I'm sorry?
Yes, I think that one has legal issues, as well as the one on like,
Okay.
Park Place.
The lot you're thinking of is across the street.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was that, what was, this before?
That's
Like it was.
predates me.
It's been that for a while.
Yeah, it's been there for.
That's a whole issue.
And there's Splash Dance, is the one company that has not gotten complaints in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
It raises a question too, because it's gonna come with daylighting later anyway. If there's a space like that empty space that was there, and it's set aside for daylighting, how much does a micro hub interfere with it?
Mm.
That was my question too.
Or is that still okay to say, that could be fine because the daylighting is not impaired enough?
Yeah.
There are spaces for micro hubs, I mean, what about like, not, the
Right, I wonder-
South Street Seaport,
Underneath that,
underneath like,
the FDR.
by the FDR, I mean, there are spaces, it might not be right in the middle of, the thing, but there are, there are places that could be satisfied to all people.
Right, but you're trying to spend so much time defending free space for cars. But answer my question.
No,
And that was about daylighting and.
when you
micro
frame
hubs.
it is spitting at the highest. I'm on my feet and on the trains all the time, but there are situations that can benefit everybody, and you're
Well,
spinning.
not everybody, but I'm looking for the answer to a question, and I'm not opposing other than, let's get this question answered.
Yeah. For a meter,
Answer your
meter
question,
park,
Peter.
everything you say, if a car parks somewhere, it's free space. I mean, I'm not even thinking like that. I'm just trying to think of something that's good for everybody if there's 2 or 3 different options.
But one of them has to be free parking.
No, it's really, the spin that you're putting on is really crazy. And
Okay, so we're not talking about parking at all. We can exclude parking as an issue.
I'm through with this. I'm continue. I'm not.
No, we want to consider all options, all considerations, please.
Which,
I'm not against daylighting.
now I'm talking about, there's a space like that one we just saw.
Mhm.
That there was set aside potentially daylighting. Is that a no-go for any kind of micro hub consideration? What do people think?
Oh, no.
If you can leverage the space that's already been opened up by daylighting and have that be where people are transloading, that makes sense, that you can do that.
So I have 2 people who say, yeah, that's not a no-go.
I mean, I still want to be able to, like, I want to be able to stand where that woman is.
Yeah, of course,
But,
but not just full length, so it's like,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean.
like where that island is, or the manhole covers,
Yeah.
north of that.
So yeah, no, it's not a total, it sounds like it's not a total no-go.
Because that minimizes actually the number of parking spaces you have to,
Or anything else. Right.
if you're reusing that space that's already been used for daylighting.
Well, Mitch, that's what you said, was you wanted to look at things that were already inaccessible to you. So that's right up your.
Yes,
That's why I didn't think it was so contentious. I wanted an answer to,
And-
is that a possibility that you would support? Which one should support?
Also, you want it to be wide. You want more than the lanes width, knowing how they're gonna offload. They're gonna not just fit in the width of a lane, they're gonna come on the side, so they need space, more than just one lane.
Kate, is that a reasonable assumption or no?
I think that's fair. I'll bring that back, though.
Okay, so all the ones that they proposed are not adequate because they've all gone for parking lanes and other sorts of things, other than the one center median.
I'll confirm.
I think we have one more location.
Yes, but I don't want to assume that everything they sent us is wrong. Because realistically, you think they won't stay within those confines. That's why, let's get that verified, and it won't be in the resolution at this point because that's a speculation.
Cody?
I'm Liberty New William Street.
For this one, we're looking at having it on Liberty.
Did you say Liberty 3 times?
Sorry,
Did you say Liberty 3 times?
did I?
It's the commercial.
I'm
Oh.
missing something.
We all did, okay.
The south side, I will say it 3 times now. On the south side, it's on Liberty Hills.
So this is Liberty that we're looking at.
This is south.
Oh, yeah.
And on the east and on the south side. Okay.
The south and west gets a little tricky down.
Yeah.
You twisted it right here.
Yeah, on that.
This side.
Yes.
How about this side?
No, so no, not on that side. I was only gonna say because it's parked, but it looks like they also are parking on the right side too.
This might be a really good side.
Yeah.
I mean,
But do okay them further developing the location that they've suggested, which is not, it's a broad area. It's not a very focused. Because I want to spend a lot of time saying, what about this corner or that corner, this? Is it worth developing, but they'd have to come back to it really much more concrete.
I didn't see much of an issue.
Yeah. I just want to be respectful of that park that's there, but other than that.
Yeah.
don't know, I can't remember if traffic parks there all every.
Of course, there's always, they're always.
This is no stopping in time.
I
Yeah.
walk past there very often, there's always cars on both sides.
I'm glad that they follow in the laws and enforcing them.
Well, I'm gonna let the DOT sort that out, because they have to look at their own sign. But yes, that means that particular location is very unlikely that the DOT is going to choose it.
Okay.
Nevertheless, I don't want to spend a lot of time micromanaging something that I don't need to second guess them. If it looks generally okay, there's nothing glaring, let them develop it and then we'll respond if the proposal comes forward. Right, because you're saying none of these are guaranteed.
Yes, that's correct.
And they'd have the affirmative proposal comes forward, if a specific site is identified.
I'd like to make a suggestion.
Same here. The suggestion being.
It's fast if you want to type them. But anyway, let's want to get the suggested location. One was Greenwich Street. So that's right.
Greenwich and in between Jane Harrison.
Right. And it's where the former PS 150, the bus stop was. And then this would have to be done, this is conditional. Work done with reflected bike lane improvements between Northmore and Chambers.
This is more from.
This is-
Yeah, this is.
No, these are people, these are various members of the CB1 that made suggestions. This one, in fact, happens to be coming from Carrie. Who couldn't come tonight, but she asked me to.
So Greenwich.
Formerly location of a PS 150. Bus stop, and of course the school has moved.
I don't know, I like our little Greenwich Street in historic district. I don't want to put stuff there. Oh, I see. Okay.
On the left side, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that actually makes sense.
Totally.
I'm waiting for Kate to.
I'm just trying to think if this is owned by the Port Authority, but I may be thinking of a different location.
That's
This,
IPN. It's
I'm thinking of
IPN.
somewhere else.
Yeah, that's IPN.
Oh,
Are you thinking? Okay,
this is-
so that's a potential, all right.
Okay, we're not to be listed among suggested things.
Jeff,
And the sidewalk is wide.
I'll say if there's no, I'll split it. Let's see, Carrie is.
and I think a lot of people use it, are using it already, to be honest.
Yes, and we're gonna miss her next month too, but Carrie is the real power behind Dwayne Park.
All right.
So she's organized with all this. She's. Anything we do, you know, she has experience doing it. We talk about anything, she's a licensed pilot. You know, and she
Oh, yes, that's right. The pilot, that's a pilot, yes.
That's great.
she manages Dwayne.
Okay.
So we go to her for everything. The second one. There in front of the Con Ed utility building. This was put as a counter by Alice because the location was tied up for between Sixth Street and Church Street, that median strip. That this was only a block away and was something to consider.
So Finn Square.
And I said, I won't tell her that she's ratting out the Finn Square people because she's saying, or not even trying.
Well, she has advocated for Finn Square often, so.
And again, these things shouldn't be that big. And again, they have more.
I said, if you go to the Google Maps, let's look to see what's there.
A lot of trucks, like I say, and this is a site selected because it is used currently by so many.
All right, so it's, I mean, I wouldn't want it where they are now. I would kind of prefer it on the other side. It is a park and I want to use it as a park.
Right, but is this an area that's suggesting for worth developing? And looking at?
I think, in my opinion, yes.
And Kate, is that enough information?
I think the-
What's that, I think to get them done. Okay, well, if there are no real objections, we'll put this down as another potential suggestion going forward.
Because like that whole left side is essentially kind of dead.
Is there a hydrant there? That's my only concern, why it's,
Well, they can work with those things.
I don't see one.
okay.
There wasn't anything, I looked at all. there was
Okay.
nothing.
It's far enough from the curb, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Oh, there's that.
On it, a loose park thing.
Uh-uh. Yeah, I actually, I don't know, I've actually seen a lot of parking in the area. The only thing, but I think that's mostly resolved is they were doing a lot of construction, but I think that, again, it's mostly resolved and they've moved further up this time.
Again, it's probably worth developing, and I think the DOT will figure it out pretty quickly if there's a problem. But yeah, there doesn't seem to be anything active at this point, and Alice certainly had looked around and felt that those things weren't. There were no screaming issues, though.
Yeah.
Close by.
Somebody's like, okay.
And the final one that came from people, oh, and this came from me, North and South End Avenue is already being looked at by the Battery Park City Authority. And there is cross-loading going on both of those locations. Amazon is the bigger problem on the south. On the north side, it's more UPS and FedEx and a bunch of others.
Are you saying the same message we're saying, Zach?
So in fact, I know, I have been told by the authority, they're already dealing with the DOT, trying to get something done. And yes, there is resiliency and other work that's going on. They specifically want things to start taking place because they want organization during this time of chaos and all these trucks coming together.
Is that the library on the right?
The libraries,
So that's not that. Is that across from like the, if you go up, is that across from Dwayne, is that the,
the
dark-
Carson Conrad Hotel. The ballparks are behind the building that's actually on North End Avenue, and they are between Murray and Prince Street.
I'm trying to, can you spin around, trying to figure out where this is? That's the library, okay. And you're saying it would
In
be,
the corner of that is the library. So we just passed the library. And we're moving towards the Irish Hunger Monument, which is kind of, and the Conrad is on the left side.
so you're saying in the other direction, so we go back another direction.
Yeah, they're not, this is right at Brookfield.
Mhm.
They're not there. They're here between Murray's and then they're at the median area when you get to Warren Street.
And so you're recommending where here? So that's the dark part.
The one that the Battery Park City Authority has been talking about is on North End Avenue. They're leaving a little bit open. But where a lot of the activity is taking place is everywhere from Murray to Warren Street.
Is there space there? I think I'm missing where there's space to have a hose.
They're using mostly the side of the road, but they're also using up against the median. They're all over the place. I think the real issue the Battery Park City Authority is talking about is these are the areas where we have problems. We want the DOT to suggest that organization location.
Wait, what do you mean problems? Like, is it, so it's happening there already?
Oh, yeah.
Is that what you mean? Okay.
And Amazon is the bigger problem, as I said, over by South End Avenue on 10th Street. Over by 10th Street.
I can't keep up because Zach is clicking all around.
I know.
But sure, if you think it's a good location.
So
Because
where is the location proposed? I don't know where.
Yeah,
it is.
yeah.
Question is, do you agree with the Battery Park City Authority moving forward and supporting what they say is best for their neighborhood?
Uh,
Now, they're a state agency, but we are the only community that has an actual entity that runs the 92 acres, appointed by the governor. Because it is a state entity.
so you said north end and south.
But the DOT controls the streets though, right?
DOT always controls the streets. On the north end, they are not turned over to the DOT yet, so they actually
Can you
belong to
turn
the.
it this way a little bit?
On the south, they actually belong to the DOT if
Other
they
way.
look at it. But the borough commissioners of the past have always said, Of course, they defer a lot to what the Battery Park City Authority approves. They're not gonna work against them.
So it sounds like we're suggesting like this area over here to the left, or BPCA is suggesting like over here to
What
the,
I would suggest is what the Battery Park City Authority, supporting what they suggest,
which is
which
that,
at this time is on South End Avenue and North End Avenue.
is that what we're looking at?
This is
It's north. and-
North End and Murray,
Where it's, oh, so
Murray.
it's south and one block up?
No, you have to go to the other side of Brookfield.
Yeah.
That's what's kind of complicated. Brookfield Place goes from the river to West Street. You cannot cut through north and south in Battery Park City. You have to go out around West Street.
Is that where Tammy was recommending where there was a former loading area that's not used anymore? Is that what?
No,
I think that was here, right?
the part that she's suggesting, but it doesn't match up with micro. Is
Okay.
that on Brookfield Place on West Street, there is a loading dock that she says Brookfield Place is no longer really using. So it's a driveway and then it's slanted down,
Okay, and they
which
can't do
would be awkward, and it's private property, it's not DOT property. Which is what Katie said, they're working with DOT property. What everyone admits, and Tammy has said multiple times, it's around 10th Street on South Monday, you know, where all Amazon activity, and they work in the middle of the road. So there, they don't work on corners, they work in the middle of the road.
Oh, is this where you click on the live image?
Usually parks, yeah, along this.
And so we're saying, let's put them on either side.
So,
I mean, that works. I mean, Battery Park City has have bigger roads and sidewalks and stuff, so.
That's what I'm saying, I defer to the authority, because they have the say anyway. So
I mean, but
I mean, we should, I mean, I'm just saying, we should still speak up, because they may not speak for everybody. I know they have the authority, but, yeah, as long as there's wide sidewalks and hopefully some trees to buffer ways.
there's 1/3. Believe me, we have more trees.
it's suburbia.
Okay.
And I am aware that construction of Wagner Park should be finishing up this fall.
Hmm.
And then the 5-year plan for the Northwest project will start. The Battery Park City Authority and Zach's there for the committee meetings. Is very aware of that, and they have a consulting team, but it's Sarah. Correct? Like, they're doing the work and looking at it, and they
Yes.
want to do pedestrian and bicycle and car mobility during and after the project. They are very involved in safety, safe roads and good access, so all of that is going on. You can always watch the Battery Park City Committee. The next one about this stuff will be in July. So this was simply a suggestion to support what it is that I know they are promoting. Because why not?
Mhm. Can we now make
Committee members.
recommendations to add to that list?
Yes. Right.
I'm recommending a place between Broadway and Church on the south side. Because again, they're already doing it, but I actually think it's a fair location.
The South Side of Parkland,
Yes,
between Broadway and
yes.
Second.
If you wanna pull it up, Zach, just to see, so,
Say
Park
again,
Place,
sir?
Park Place and Church. So, yeah, goes, keep going straight
this way?
down Park Place.
Yeah,
Yep.
Park Place on the south side of the street he's talking about.
Mhm. And you can actually back up a little bit, because I think there actually might be, they probably have a picture of people there already. Yep,
Yeah.
so it's where that like white truck is.
This pops.
Wait a minute, wait a minute.
Mhm. is in front of that box. But I think they're doing it already, but I think seems like a decent location. They're obviously serving, the Four Seasons building, Barclay, 10 Barclays across the street, Hightower, Woolworth is right here. And then there's another residential building right there. And just for everybody, we were talking about earlier, they keep closing this side of the street off. That's the side that they had like the food festival and whatever. But it's like that, specifically going in that direction, it gets very, very low traffic. But now coming in the other direction, it's where we have high traffic.
Any objection? Seeing none, let's listen to another suggestion. So now Eric, you said we had.
Yes, Mitch had alluded to it as well. Under the FDR makes sense. There's no sunlight underneath the FDR. There's already road noise, ambient road noise. That makes so much sense. I know people will say it's public space, but it's not quality public space. And you're not,
Want to give it an area, like between what streets or anything?
I don't have a specific, but that's why it's so appropriate. There's so much of it underneath the FDR. If there's a place where that's not currently being used.
Or Old Slip.
Sure.
Just to give it
Yeah.
a location.
Right, although I can tell you that what came up last time this was mentioned, one, in the DOT presentation, it talked about for now, they're looking at on-street. Those they consider off-street. I don't know why it's considered off-street because it's still on the street. Yeah. They define anything under an overpass. Then they said they were kind of stepping away from that at this time.
Is there a reason that you felt that they?
Tammy had come forward and said she sees a lot of purposes for that, and she is opposed at this time to having the micro hubs in that location. And I'm sure can't speak for her. I know one thing she has suggested in the past is we know that Pier 6 is going to be a hub. And one of the places she was suggesting was they use under the FDR as their way of traveling. So she's looking at the travel path.
I'm just curious, what would be the objection of a kind of desolated place where it wouldn't really affect most people, bicycles or cars or pedestrians at off hours, under the FDR? I'm just
I
curious.
just told you why.
I didn't, maybe I didn't understand.
She sees that as a route for the e-bikes that would be coming on, offloading from the marine vessels at Pier 6, would be traveling up and through to the district.
But these things are not happening 24/7. These are like at different times during the day. I'm not likely to
It's
disagree.
included, but I want you to know that objection has come up, and it probably will come up in full board.
There's a lot of real estate. That's what I'm saying. A lot of places from
I'm
which.
not opposed to it, but I think what's probably also important and that they're looking for in this is like, who are they serving? And like, you don't want there to be a long distance between them getting their packages and then they have to, bike a mile before they can drop it off.
But I didn't say that would be the only one. That could be maybe one instead of one of the places in more condensed area.
No,
think
I agree.
Like a little of both.
I'm just saying like or I guess maybe what I'm encouraging is like this.
Offloading is already occurring there.
Yeah, like give us a more specific location of where there's like a lot of buildings that they could be serving.
I'm not sure.
They're opening up, they're being converted, they're converting, and I don't know what you call it, but it narrows to the southern Manhattan, it narrows, so it's not that much land, to go west.
This location right here is not too far from the Purple Street.
But
The Liberty and the Liberty.
But then we go from. Again, I'm not opposed to it because I get your point. It's under the FDR. It's like vacant space supposedly, but like I guess what I'm recommending is that let's make sure that we're recommending it in terms of like how serviceable it is to the actual community that they're trying to service. So the one at Key Foods, it's very clear. They're servicing all that area and there's so much going on, but now you're taking it like 3 blocks away.
Only
2
3 blocks away.
2 or 3 blocks to pedal, I mean,
Is there a map that has a service, I don't know,
nothing's
radius?
gonna be like exactly perfect, Brendan, I would think, so just.
I don't have that right now, I can see.
So there's that big building that got converted.
Oh, the former JP Morgan building?
Brendan, I would think as time goes on, there'll be more development with more people, like, just like there used to be nothing down like by the World Trade Center, you know? I would think over the coming years, there'll be things,
Sure, but this is a pilot, 2-year pilot.
yes.
And so we want to see, what they're doing is collecting the data during that 2-year period. And
They
so,
need active.
yeah,
Well,
And no one is harmed. I mean, no one is harmed or, there are no negative consequences for anybody that's living in that area. That's all.
Right, but there may not be data that DOT is looking for this specific pilot.
But they'll evaluate.
okay.
So exactly. It will go on the list. But again, that is the drawback to it, because we can't suggest, you're not going to see a lot of this traffic problems and things they're trying to correct, because as Brendan said, it's not particularly used by current delivery.
and I don't want, there can be this legal one under the FDR, and then Amazon still uses the one in front of Key Foods legally.
Oh,
And so that's why I want to make sure that it's serving the closivity of the community.
and there's a bike lane there, so they can access things. Oh, they can access things as necessary with the bike lane in that field. I know you don't.
I think we got it, yeah, but let's do suggestion,
Okay.
plus the ones we responded to. DOT suggested, and actually only one of them was outright problematic. And if they go to the curbside, it might. Plenty, way more choices and they're even.
Okay. And then,
Yes, to therefore be resolved, the issue is, this has multiple steps to it. We were going to resolve, was it gonna be support or not for the micro hub pilot? And it was asked back by Tammy, please wait so we can list some locations. So that's why we waited a month. So I know today we did not do a lot of talk about micro hub in general, but that's what this is going back to, since you weren't here, something did that. And suggested word that people can respond to, and this has multiple parts to it. So no, it doesn't say everything. So this really gets down to, do you agree with the concept and the proviso there that electric vans may be appropriate in some locations, but would require case by case, because they're quite different than carts and e-bikes.
In the sentence, I was wondering if we could put in if, because Katie said it could be a possibility. In order, CB1 supports repurposing on-street commercial loading areas as on-street micro hubs, consistent with the hours of the parking, no parking signs.
that like hours of operation.
Yes, sir. And like I said, I really think that's a win-win situation. Then they can only deliver between 7 AM and 7 PM. But the thing is not accessible 24 hours. So, maybe, how would the other people feel? Maybe just putting that with.
So maintaining the commercial loading hours of operation.
Thank you.
I don't know how I came up with that because it's late and my brain's usually dead, but.
You think better when you're tired.
Okay. Be it further resolved. And this was one about the Sixth Avenue meeting, it's probably gonna change that. But this would be unless there's a commitment from the DOT. Do you want to just plain strike this, or are you saying unless it's curbs up? Or do you want to strike it completely?
If it's gonna be in the median, I'm not a fan of it. Sounds like others might be a fan of it. We only would support that location if it were curbside.
That we support it, but And then,
Is that true of everybody?
yeah, commercial, what is it?
Because it can't just be on that street, period.
Commercial, no parking, so it's not 20%.
So I know these three, Eric, Mitch, we were saying, so at that where, Barnum Newman is, where it's gonna be in that median. We support, we don't want it to be in the median, right? Do we support it being curbside in that area?
Well, potentially being developed.
I'm not sure, I was just like focusing on the other part, and I'm not as familiar with that area.
Okay.
Okay, anyone opposed to
And
it?
was that thing waiting, like needed parking or anything like that, or?
I
And
think,
sometimes we might have to, so I'm not like.
yeah, I think it,
Either side.
yeah, I think either side, but I think what we would, there would still need to be development and analysis by DOT, because we also looked at it potentially going down the other street where, it wouldn't necessarily be taken away.
Right, if they want to develop this location, at least if it's curbside.
Yeah. So like, we didn't want it to impact the park that
Yes.
Alice and friends.
I mean, basically, I'm okay with it anywhere, as long as it follows like, you know, the existing, like, say, delivery commercial parking rules, because nobody can use it during the day anyway. And like I said, so I'm kind of generally with that.
Okay, and then didn't feel with the problem. I added that to the North Fulton Cliff Street. This would be also another proviso that there are changes at the intersection of Fulton and Cliff Street along Cliff Street's North Fulton Street to address the resident safety concerns.
I kind of think more generally where we encourage them to, we understand the need for a micro hub in that location to support that part of the community, but maybe encourage them to look at a different location. I can't parse that well.
Because also there's a commercial need for truck, not part of the micro hub, but look, you have Fulton Street, and there's a bakery there. They need their own deliveries and it won't be done by micro hubs. They get their,
I don't think we have to include that in the be it further resolved, but I think for that part, we want, what I'm getting at is we want them to evaluate those two blocks and find a better location. So between the name of that street is.
closer to the water, right?
Sure, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm okay with closer to water, but yeah, so if we can reevaluate or DOT can, if they decide this is a location for a micro hub,
You want it east of Cliff Street.
yes.
Towards water.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, anyway, they pick along there.
Yeah.
No other restrictions on either side of the street. They'll figure out if there are any.
Mhm.
We support the area, but need to accommodate Fulton Market deliveries and look east of Cliff Street.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, there weren't really any others. I'm gonna listen to the tape again. But next, there's so many vehicles. There are no results. Yeah, here's 3 more. Ask that CB1 be kept informed about any locations that are selected for installation of a micro hub, including the company that will be authorized to use it, and the volume and type of cross-loading that's planned. So we'll know if it's vans, bikes, carts.
The only problem I have is with the 10 PM if the previous signs were like till 7 PM.
Stick with this particular,
I'm sorry,
stick with this particular,
We're just on the first one.
I'm sorry, okay,
we'll get to the others.
sure.
Any particular problems with that? Unless we want to the second one. Active use of the micro hubs, whoops, for that
Okay.
is restricted to, and I put in random times here. And do you want it Monday through Friday, Monday through Saturday, Monday through Sunday? In residential areas, in all areas? I mean, what kind of guidance are we giving regarding the active use of the hubs?
Commercial, it's not on Sundays, right? Kate, I'm sure it's not on Sundays for the commercial.
It's usually not.
A lot of signs around where I live are Monday through Friday, no parking, like 8 to 6 or 7 to 7. So I would go for Monday through Friday, and if the existing hours are 8 to 6 or 7 to 7, I would go with that.
The only reason why I would encourage us to go to Saturdays, because we know, I mean, that these are like, not just Amazon, but they're Amazon deliveries, and a lot of us get our deliveries on Saturday.
We get deliveries on Sundays.
Yeah.
Well, okay,
But maybe,
sure, at least one day of.
Yeah.
One day of reprieve.
yeah,
Right. Yeah.
So we're sticking with the Monday to Saturday.
Well,
We're sticking not in residential areas only because so many of ours are mixed areas.
yeah.
You know, you call-
yeah, even commercial areas are mixed areas. I mean,
Yeah,
Okay, so I'll just cut out the residential
Yeah.
areas.
or the existing, what about like, there might be no parking Monday through Saturday. There might be already assigned no parking Monday through Friday, whatever the existing signs are
to me,
and the hours.
I agree. I think that's an and. So like, I think, like, we keep that and then say, and or for locations that already have commercial, restrictions, maintaining those commercial restrictions or something like that. So to your point, if it's Monday through Friday, 7 to 7, they would do that for that area, if that's locations.
But what would be allowed to? And I guess that's, Kate, a question to you. Does DOT really want to know what would be tolerated, or do they just
Yeah.
say,
I
we're
think-
not opposed to changing it?
I mean, looking, I think more for general feedback and taking it under advisement, but I can't guarantee that we'd be able to adhere to these recommendations, yeah.
Right, but you're not looking for us to necessarily stick with, you're looking for a recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're free to say anything that's the minute going to use it anyway.
Yeah.
And my question to you is what is tolerable, and that's kind of what I'm looking.
What about not having the hours put down, like say, according to the existing according to the existing regulations?
The only thing there is that like some locations that we have recommended don't have existing.
There's no streets that already have.
Some are commercial already, but the one with a space in the middle of the street.
Okay.
So that's why I say, let's keep what we have there, because I think that's reasonable, the 7 to 10, Monday through Saturday, and then add on to your point, if there's already commercial restriction times, and days, maintaining that.
This will be different than how the rules were written for the commercial loading and unloading. This vendor will camp out. I foresee them camping out during the time. They'll bring a truck and they'll also have lights, because now you have LED, you can have lights almost anytime, anywhere. They're gonna make noise. I'm concerned that
They're not allowed to, right? Like, well, I guess.
I'm just saying, I'm thinking now that it should not be past dusk, or at least not too far on the average dusk, like 9, 8, because they're gonna be making noise. Because now that it'll be theirs, they don't have to, this will be their spot, so.
But they have rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, they won't be followed.
We get complaints all the time.
But I call in 311 all the time
Right,
on the
but-
construction
And they
stuff.
do what? I'm not you, I'm saying, they don't do anything.
Sometimes I had to call in a bunch of times to finally get them to
But we're
stop
trying to
off
avoid
hours.
having to do that.
But also to this point, or to this, like, that's what the QR code is for, and we don't know yet how quickly they're gonna respond, but
We can also revoke
Yeah.
consent from the business.
that's the big part, is that they can actually revoke consent, so they get complaints, whereas like we know what happens with construction, like, that's
Or direct
different.
them through one.
Yeah.
And it also goes to political influence. If you have Amazon, they're world, I don't want to say power, but they're very influential here.
True, but then they don't care anyway, so whatever you say doesn't matter anyway.
So that's what I'm saying.
Worst case
You won't-
scenario.
No, good. I mean, I get it. I'm a nighttime quiet guy. That's why I'm down in this neighborhood. But I want to be like, I want to straddle the line of like less supporting because we know that we're all ordering this stuff anyway. And also like put some kind of like restrictions in place. And again, I think the important part is that they can actually get revoked from being part of the program.
I don't foresee that happening. I mean, unless it's
And
something egregious.
The other thing that we know is we've got these people that are gonna then they're just gonna do it, they're doing it illegally now, so.
Okay, I'll say this, we had a meeting here 3 months ago where somebody, a micro hub company or a delivery company, and then their offices are in the DOT building at 55 Water Street. So I'm just saying they're closer than we
Well,
think.
compare clean cities.
So
And again, that's a little bit different.
I'm using an example of sometimes, okay, that they can be closer than we know and don't want to jeopardize a relationship. But okay, that's politics. So, what's wrong with 9 PM? 10 PM is really late to have them being able to work and unload with the gate on the truck slamming and
Are
then.
there standard hours of any sort, Kate?
I have to check.
Okay, 'cause that would be some guidance, and I'm
Sure.
not aware of what it is.
Yeah, Kate, didn't you say before, like, it was like the normal hours, even though you had certain delivery hours, like, did they have something in mind of what they're, like, separate from this, what their normal delivery hours might be from, whether it's 7 to 7, 8 to
So
6?
those examples I gave were examples of existing commercial parking regulations.
Okay, so we're,
I can check what the hours are for the Upper West Side
Mhm.
pilot. And share that with Betty, because that's what we're using.
so,
Do people agree to use those hours, because that's what it's going to be anyway?
What the Upper West Side's doing already.
Oh,
Are we
which
okay with
is-
that?
Which is.
We don't know, she's done it.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's, oh.
Right, do people agree with that? Because we have to vote on something, we can't wait until we find
Yeah.
out. Although, the full board, you can vote differently, because I should know the time by then.
yeah, I would just, if we don't know exactly what that is, I would err on less than 10 o'clock. And then if we find out something different, expand it, then,
Now, wait a minute, Mitch, I'm gonna flip it back on you.
okay.
Because you're the person that's all, you just talked about it tonight, how all these people that are working later hours, that's why, you were saying that that's why they need the parking spaces.
Yeah,
They also need deliveries later. Because that's the only reason why I think 10, and again, I am the quiet guy, I'm in bed by 10, but like people are getting deliveries, families, working people are getting deliveries later.
no, I thought that they wanted, I mean, this neighborhood wanted, like, deliveries not to go, like, in the middle of the night, or not that's the middle of the night, or too late, because of most people don't work nights like I do. But if, I mean, I'm not gonna, that's
See,
fine.
I put myself in somebody else's shoes.
Oh, wow.
What-
How does it feel?
At 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Once I hear from Kate what they are, I will change it in the resolution.
That sounds
I
fine.
assume they're gonna be shorter ones, not longer ones.
Yeah.
It's not any earlier than 7 or later than 10.
I'm not sure, so I'm not going.
Yeah, because it could.
I've never seen them, but again, everybody gets to vote at full board, and I don't want to.
As long as it's not like 24/7, when they can only have, when there's only certain delivery hours, and then, it's just like there, like. But, sure, no problem.
But I won't lengthen it from 7 to 10. I will shorten it if that's what they are, because people
Sure.
saying they'd rather go with the DOT suggested times when we have them. And then micro hubs evaluated on how they limit daylighting for all road users. Which it may be light to nothing. But it's probably looked at.
Sure.
A lot of them will be near corners.
Which to me kind of makes them part of it.
I think they're gonna be small enough that you're right, they will be.
You turn the bat signal down so that everybody can see.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the cargo bikes and the carts and things are all gonna be low enough that
Okay.
they really can take up that, could be dead space for daylight, and they could do their activities. A parked big bus, a big truck, obviously would not be providing daylight. But it could be organized so that that's not the issue. Okay, you've now seen all 5 parts, there's therefore be a result. And we're gonna call the question.
Call the question.
Second,
Second.
any no's? Any abstention? Recusals? That's it. Pass unanimously.
Can we
Maybe
still
not.
got another one?
One thing, well, the other one should be, I was
Well-
promised by Tricia, if it isn't easy, she's very upset. That's why she's not here. So,
Let's see.
well, that's what I think. I'm always surprised, you have to wait to see. This is the notification to reduce speed limits to 15 miles per hour. We know that everything south of Canal Street, I know it zigzags around as you head east. Nevertheless, it's a slow zone for Manhattan. It is 20 miles per hour. It has all been changed except for West Street, which was supposed to slow from 30 to 25, and that has been delayed 2 years until a 9A study is complete. Okay, next, which are the actual schools? Sorry. And this is just to remind you that we've known all along that this was part of the Sammy's law. Was there going to be these different sorts of streets? There would be a 20 mile per hour standard reduction when they did that, 15 mile per hour next to schools, and that's on the same block next to school. And 10 mile per hour, which we're not dealing with, on streets with additional traffic calming, which we'll deal with more on some other streets that schools have asked for things. But we don't have to worry about that. We're just about 15 mile per hour next to schools. Next. And it has to be done this month because we only have 60 days to comment and it's up the middle of next. Okay, go to the next one. It also lists the schools. And Kate, you had a comment about the two in Battery Park City, which are the top one and the bottom one.
Well, just because you had asked me why other schools in CB1 weren't included. And this list of schools, they were included in the speed reduction because they already had existing school slow zones. So the school slow zones are typically 20 miles per hour. But with the speed limit being reduced below Canal Street to 20 miles per hour, these blocks are now going down to 15 to differentiate them from the larger area.
Okay, so these are already authorized
Yes.
as the slower school streets. And they're simply going down, step down like everybody else did. Any opposition given that?
Car lover. Sorry, the only thing I guess I can't get my question out. Is there an opportunity to add, I guess, the
Yes,
features?
that's the next step.
Okay.
The question is, can we move beyond the ones they've asked for that we're going to comment?
Oh, I have a question on the existing ones.
Okay.
So the one on Beekman Street between William and Nassau, there's a firehouse there, right? Yes, there is. So as long as we take that into consideration.
No one's gonna take a thing.
No, it's not ticket. It's, they need to abide by the speed limit too. I'm just want to make sure that they're aware. Whatever response time changes,
Well,
they,
let's say they need to do what they need to do, about what this.
no, but they don't,
So you're saying that you want the fire machines, I can't think, like the,
Fire engines?
yeah, to drive at 15 miles an
no,
hour.
I want them to be aware that this will affect their response times and just be aware of it.
But it doesn't need to affect their response times with my comment, because they're right there.
No, they follow the speed limits. I mean, yeah, they can speed higher, but that's on them. They do.
A fire truck?
Fire truck.
No, they would have to be, if they're going through an emergency or fire, I would think that they could do whatever they have to do.
I was gonna say,
I can tell you on an ambulance, they have to, if, they have to abide by the speed limit. If the operator chooses to do it and then they get into an
If
accident,
there's a guy having
that's
a
gonna
heart
be on
attack
them.
inside the ambulance, I would think that they would,
No, they, legally, the ambulance operator, they have the liability if they're caught speeding or something happens. So the official rule is they have to follow the speed limit.
are they in the same block as the school? There's only one block.
It's right there. They're on the south side of Nassau. On Beach.
So maybe we just add a notice to make sure that the firehouse is aware.
Yeah, I'm not against it. I'm only stating they have to be, they need to.
but who would, I mean, is this really a speed camera? I don't think any police.
Are you saying that
Fire truck.
response times are going to be impacted because they have to follow the speed limit, or because everybody around them is following the speed limit, and so then it's
Combination.
Yeah, but it's with one block, basically we're talking about like 5 to 10 seconds.
And also the ambulances that use it, Because, yeah, ambulances that come out of the hospital.
An emergency vehicle.
Yes.
Katie, I just one question to add. First of all, obviously, anything around the block of schools, I support that. I still feel that speed bumps, like I was just with somewhere with somebody else out of boroughs, and there was a couple of like small residential areas right out of school, like a speed bump at the beginning of the block. Like that does, I mean, on top of that, because even people that don't care about the speed, they selfishly don't want to ruin their car. And to put a speed bump in the beginning or sometimes like enough distance before the school, to me, that's the best thing, not precluding this. Like not saying either or, but I really think that some speed bumps in certain locations should be something that should be added. I agree. Maybe a low-level speed bump, so it doesn't hurt, like whether it's bicycles or anything like that, or, but just enough to, that really says there's a reason for that.
Because all the notification they get is like a sign.
Right.
So,
That doesn't preclude
from
from
one
stop.
block, it's like, really,
That's a physical impediment that works so well in different other neighborhoods outside of central Manhattan.
yeah.
So I don't know if you want to add that, Betty, or just, bring it to Katie for you to bring it back, but.
We're always taking suggestions, for speed humps. You can reach out to my office with them, file a 311 complaint. I think some of these schools actually may have them already in proximity. I think Spruce School,
It's just a general comment, Katie, so,
not on the actual street of the school, but around the corner. There's one.
Yeah, but-
We couldn't.
well, wherever you're planning on doing this, and if there's not, I would suggest
Yes.
a speed bump leading into the block, or at least maybe like a third into the block, not, like before you would get to where the kids are released.
Good point.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, this would simply be resolved, and it's just naming these particular schools. That's in agreement with them. Well, I know that's not the whole call. The other, therefore, be it further resolved is, and this is where you might want to come up with some names of schools. CB1 is concerned about schools in our district that will not benefit from this safety treatment, implores the DOT to seek and implement safety measures that can protect the students and others who go to them.
Well, that would be kind of what we were just talking about, right?
It could be, and it's gonna be the whereas, then they talk about the speed bumps, but there is also whereas, which is what I want to warn you about. It's the one about where we have already, CB1, we have already written resolutions about the schools and safety changes. One of them, for instance, is Hawthorne School, which is mentioned before for the children with special needs, that's on Broadway. The other one is Triton School, which is a school for special needs we've written for on John Street. And the other one is PS 150, which because it's between Church and Greenwich Street, but the pedestrians kind of go all over the place because they can't get a direct crosswalk. They're the ones that we have written things for street safety for, but have not qualified so far for getting 25 miles per hour. Did you want to list them as an act within a therefore be it resolved? What is a whereas?
Can't hurt, especially the special needs schools.
Okay, because they are named in a whereas, very specifically, those children.
Yes, please.
And then it's here covered as be it further resolved, covering them. What we'd like to
Sure.
find something. Because we'll put in the whereas about the speed bump, so that's already within the text as well.
Okay.
Okay?
Call
Call
question.
question?
Second.
He knows. Abstentions? Any recusals? Unanimous. And Tricia will be so happy, so thank you. Otherwise you'd come after.
It's the same, we gotta see what the full board says. Because I didn't expect us to be debating third, what the reason as much as you did.
Well, don't worry, the kids will be there in person to yell at them if they don't. Agree with the school kids stayed straight.
Katie, you call them speed humps?
Yeah, some bumps are bigger.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you actually don't use speed bumps anymore, and
Okay.
it's transition calling them speed bumps.
Is that where the buses had trouble with?
I didn't know that.
28 buses kind of bothered.
Yeah.
That's actually, did not,
Flashback.
did not slow the
I
bikes
presume that
down,
these
the
should be-
large.
No, I said, when I said like low-grade speed bumps, just so that it does the job without hurting other people.
That's, we call them speed bumps.
Yeah, but they don't earn the city money, that's the problem.
You know what? We'll let you go without giving you the updates, but I do need to get to the last slide because it had information to remind you about, and I will get it over.
We have Fergie Singh
Just go to the last one, there are a whole bunch of them.
or Steve.
Yeah, Jim.
You leave it.
That's really.
You come back.
Yeah, come on, leave my glasses.
All right, no, we'll take it, guaranteed.
They are backing up, and I understand that. Jim, that one is so hysterical. I'll talk to you when we're done, because it's just too funny.
Never
Here,
seen that.
did you go back one? You want to hear a funny story? This is in Ontario. This is considered a covered scooter.
What?
Scooter is, wait, it gets wild. The word scooter is used very differently. But obviously in Ontario, they don't define what a bike is. Not that they call it a scooter, not a bike anyway. Brendan, do not have a heart attack. Please relax. Because if Ontario does not specifically cover a device as a motor vehicle, it's a pedestrian.
Sidewalks.
I wonder how, I'm guessing they don't have the issue that we have, and I haven't been to Ontario, so I don't know how dense it is, but.
Well, they do, and it varies. Certainly Toronto is very dense.
That's true.
But in fact, they were talking about, they're becoming very popular because anyone who has a suspended license, drunk driving or anything, is going to these. And they just drive on the sidewalk or on the side of the road. Because Ontario doesn't cover them as any. That's to show you how messed up, that there are just so many devices coming on the market that nobody has.
I might finally go into politics if that happens.
And this is that's the flying scooter. You have to check out some of these things. Well, I'm saying this is a lot more sensible than a flying car. Oh, yeah, this is just shared rides, because they have decided, I think because the New York City DOT made them decide, they're not going to have driverless cars in New York City for a while, it's Uber. So they're gonna find other ways to make it cheaper for drivers, for passengers, which are really shared rides. But this is to remind you, in July, because of 4th of July, the whole first week, there are no committee meetings, which means we are moving to last Wednesday in July, July 23rd. Concept being, also to remind Santiago, we are closed in August. There are no CB1 meetings of any sort, it's vacation. So this is if DOT or anyone has any last minute things to clean up with comments, we're gonna be right at the end.
Zach, do you know what other committees are meeting that week?
I don't think anybody, but the CB1 meeting is the Tuesday after.
Okay.
They're at the very, so they're July.
Imagine it's when we,
Tuesday, the 29th is the CB1 meeting in July. Because we're Wednesday.
quality of, well, I feel like quality of life and executive probably then will follow the same week.
Executive week is definitely earlier, as is quality of life. And I think even environment, I had a choice of dates in the final decision.
Hey, if that's
Not
all we
make
want that
it-
week, I'm down. Yeah.
Must be at the end, because it can't be the first week, and we are gonna be jammed with everybody else.
Mhm.
There was no other time, like everyone's packed into 2 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
every night.
Oh.
So this is give you a heads up, so you can plan your time out. But I really want.
See you.
I'll be.
Oh, that, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sounds good.